Dun, 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 dun. Oh, that was terrible. Dun, dun, dun.
Something happened there.
Third grade music class. Our teacher is getting the ruler out because this is You know, sometimes you win some and you lose some. We're not going to start a quartet of anytime soon of musical talent.
Dun 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 dun.
It's not that hard, right? For the people that are taking over the show, Brandy, you'd think that they would have practiced this.
I feel bad for Brian Greasy. I do. I thought he had a pretty nice career going on until that self-inflicted wound, and it could be a career ender. A
career ender.
Yes.
He's just about to take over Monday Night Football, but forget about it.
Exactly.
Poor guy.
The man completely blew it in 3 second?
Of all of the talent he had on the field.
Wait a minute. Ho. Back it up. He played with Charles Woodson. He played with some great players. So let's before we make him into a Heisman Trophy winner, okay? Let's just say he had a great cast around him.
He had a great cast around him. That's
Sorry, Brian. No, you were wonderful. We love you to death. Don't ever sing again.
Jim Brandstatter, voice of the Michigan Wolverines in the house. Kyle Bogey from 97.1 The Ticket. I'm your host, Justin Rose. Thank you so much for joining us on the 7 Sportscave. Tons to get to. The Monday Night Football group will rejoin us later on in the program, talking about them taking over the broadcast. Of course, Lions football. We'll be talking about that. We have a special golf segment coming up later on and an opportunity for you to meet Colin Montgomery locally. Got to check that out as well. But we have to start where we usually start on this show, with college football. Late night for some of us, staying up and watching the Spartans lose in the desert to Arizona State, 16-13. First reactions, guys, I kind of looked at that game, and especially after I saw the Sun Devils play in week 1, I said, this will be a problem.
It goes back to the basics and the fundamentals of all college football. You cannot waste opportunities in the red zone. You throw a pick down there. When that happened, I thought Michigan State was in control of the game until that play.
Okay.
And when that play happened, I kind of felt like Arizona State got a little momentum, got a little, hey, we can play with these guys attitude. And then late, that kid Harry, their outside receiver,
absolutely,
he is a beast.
You knew that he was going to have his chance at some point. This is the #1 prospect in college football.
And when they covered him man-to-man at one point, and I give the quarterback credit, he read it, saw it, and went there, and his guy made a play. And that ultimately, I think, pushed it in their favor, and that was, I think, the beginning of the end for Michigan State, and that was all she wrote. But that kid can play.
It is funny because Arizona State got down 13-3, that huge touchdown for Cody White, and you would think that would have played into the hands of Michigan State. They would have gotten a little bit, settled in and started to run the football, maybe win the game and be in control. It actually worked in the opposite favor. It worked for Arizona State because they started opening things up. And as you mentioned, they went to their big weapons on the outside. They decided to take advantage of those one-on-one opportunities and allow those guys to make plays down the field, and they certainly did. And, I mean, for Michigan State, breakdowns on the offensive line, particularly on the right side, right at midfield, late in that fourth quarter, you can't do any of that if you expect to win a game.
I think that we're starting to see maybe a little bit what this Michigan State team is going to be if they can fix some of these issues and shore some of these things up. I'm starting to think a little bit more big picture here because, look, I don't by any stretch of the imagination think that their season is even close to remotely over. I don't think of that about Michigan after they lost Notre Dame's first game. Non-conference is non-conference. Sure, it's a nice feather in the cap when you move forward, but you go through and you win the Big East or Big Ten East and you get to the Big Ten Championship game and you win that game, you're likely looking at a spot in the college football playoff. We've seen it before.
I don't think there's any question. I think the Big Ten East is the toughest division in college football. And let's face it, I give you two things. Lewerke's the real deal. I don't care what anybody says out there. That kid, I think, and Trace McSorley and Haskins at Ohio State are the 3 front runners, in my opinion, to be the All-Big Ten quarterback, okay? And the other thing is, a few years ago, Michigan State's wide receivers couldn't catch a cold. Now, they are great. Yeah. I mean, Felton Davis is the real deal. I mean, they've got guys now that make plays, high point the ball. I think their receiving corps is outstanding. You put those two things together, they're going to be a tough out, whoever they play, as you go forward.
Let me ask you this, Brandy. You've been around the college game longer than Kyle and I have, so to know that as a former offensive lineman, how long does it take for a unit to get together? Because it looks like, and we can talk about Michigan and Michigan State, because it seems like some of the problems are very symmetric.
they're very similar in many ways, and it takes a long time. I mean, I've always said the most important part of an offense is the offensive line, because those 5 guys have to operate as one. And one of the things you were talking about, Kyle, you saw some of the blitzes that hurt Michigan State out in Arizona State. Those were mistakes of how you hand a guy off, how you work. You can't look at the guy next to you to make sure he's going to the right spot. You both have to know and do it instinctively. And that takes time, that takes practice.
Was it more the offensive line needing to gel, things just aren't there? Is it more Brian Lewerke not, potentially being in charge? Yes, Justin.
Could we potentially talk about the play calling?
Of course.
Because I'm sitting here, and I know that on your station from 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock tomorrow, somebody's going to have a pretty strong point about the play calling, or lack thereof, putting them in a situation to win the football game. And I think that we saw, once again, some of that Warner stubbornness to get away from some of the bread and butter when it's not working.
Well, I think giving Arizona State some of the credit as well, disguising some of those blitzes. They had guys dropping off, coming in last minute, that potentially creating some confusion for a younger-ish offensive line. Maybe that played into it a little bit as well.
You notice against Notre Dame, a lot of people were on Shea Patterson saying, what's wrong with him? But you see when an offensive line does its job against Western Michigan, that kid against Western made a couple of throws. There are guys on Sunday that would be envious of the kind of throws he made. But when he had the time, he had a pocket, and he had a run game to cover him, all of a sudden Shea Patterson became darn good. You give Lewerke the same thing, that kid is an NFL prospect.
And I think that as we transition into the talk with Michigan, over 300 yards on the ground, the running backs did the thing. It makes you question why Chris Evans didn't get a couple more touches maybe in that first game. But the offensive line, let's start there, because that was probably the biggest problem area for the Wolverines in week 1. It seemed to be the biggest improvement in week 2. Now, is that a caliber of practice, or is that a caliber of competition?
I think it's a combination. Let's be frank here, guys. Western Michigan and Notre Dame. And the way this season is stacking up, Michigan has a 4-game season. They will not get any credit if they beat SMU. They probably won't get any credit if they beat Maryland, although they should. But people will stand up and take notice of Michigan, depending on what they do against Wisconsin, Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan State. Those 4 games. So, yeah, they played better against Western Michigan. The offensive line got better. That's a confidence builder. But they've got to get much better than that, I think, to compete with those 4 teams I just mentioned.
Well, and here I am to not give Michigan credit for beating the crap out of Western Michigan, because, no, I agree with you. It is a combination, and certainly after, the debacle at Notre Dame, getting back in practice and being able to have some time to, to work on things and figure some things out, that certainly helps. So you do take that into Western Michigan and you go, all right, time to work on some stuff, and they looked vastly improved, especially on the offensive line. But for me, and I think for a lot of people out there, we've seen Michigan run the football all over teams that just aren't very good. And it hasn't translated yet to the teams that you mentioned, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Ohio State, and Penn State.
It does take a little bit of the pressure off the program, though, and I think that's, now granted, I don't know how, with social media these days, I got to believe these kids, I know that Chase Winovich is Twitter searching his own name and retweeting stuff about his hair and stuff like that. So obviously they're looking, and I feel like these kids can take a, okay, we're not as bad as everyone just told us we for 7 days,
Well, I think the same thing can be said for Notre Dame. Notre Dame goes out and beats Michigan 24-17. They're on top of the world. They win on Saturday against, who'd they play?
Ball
State. And they win by 8. And I'm sure there are people at Notre Dame going, oh my God, Wimbush isn't the guy we thought he is. Oh my God, the sky is falling. Michigan's 1-1, and they feel better because they won 49-3. You got to look at the body of work, and I agree with you. I mean, I think Michigan should get credit for beating them. They should get credit for winning 49-3. They had to win that big. They did. Now, they all know that it's going to get harder as it goes forward. They don't schedule the game. Somebody 20 years ago scheduled that game. But the kids need to win those games. Those young men need to get that confidence and get that taste out of their mouth and realize we won, we can be good, now we got to get better. And that's where I think Harbaugh is trying to go with them. They're talented, but again, they're not going to really get any credit, I don't think, until they win one of those big games.
Lest we forget that not too long ago, Michigan State lost to Notre Dame, went all the way, marched into the Rose Bowl. So it is possible for both Michigan and Michigan State to control their destiny, and all their goals are still in front of them. Yes, it's coach speak, but guess what? It's true. All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about another team that controls its own destiny in a different sense. Lions, Monday Night Football.
Dun, 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 dun.
There it is. Dun, dun. We got you guys covered. We're taking over the broadcast. Get your tweets in using the hashtag 7SportsCave coming up later on the show. We'll talk about that as well. We'll be right back after this break. Stay with us.